The story of the 1994 half dollar is not just the story of a single coin. It is a story of American heritage, of numismatic evolution, of economic change, and of cultural identity tied to a piece of metal that has passed from hand to hand for generations. The half dollar itself has one of the most fascinating trajectories in United States coinage, beginning with its introduction in the late 18th century and carrying through to the present day has been a denomination that at times was cherished in commerce, at times overlooked, and at times revived through commemorations and collector enthusiasm. The year 1994 sits at a very interesting crossroads in the half dollar's journey, because by the mid-1990s, the Kennedy half dollar, which had been introduced in 1964 to honor the memory of President John F. Kennedy 30 years earlier, was no longer widely circulating in everyday transactions. By this time, many Americans rarely saw half dollars in their daily purchases, and yet the United States Mint continued to strike them both for circulation and for collectors, which means that each 1994 half dollar embodies a unique dual role. It is a coin of the people, but also a coin increasingly designed for hobbyists, investors, and historians. To understand the 1994 half dollar in its fullness, we need to go back to 1963, when the nation was shocked by the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the youthful president who had come to symbolize vigor, progress, and hope, was suddenly gone, and in a wave of national mourning, the Mint rushed to create a new coin that would carry his image. The half-dollar denomination was chosen both because of its relatively large size, which could accommodate a strong portrait, and because it was a coin that still held an important place in daily use at that time. So in early 1964, the first Kennedy half dollars were struck, and they immediately became keepsakes. People lined up at banks to get them, hoarding them as mementos rather than spending them. This early hoarding would foreshadow the strange relationship the public would later have with the half dollar, where it was at once admired and collected, but not consistently used in circulation. By the time we reached 1994, the Kennedy half dollar had gone through significant changes. Its silver content, which in 1964 had been 90%, was reduced starting in 1965 to a 40% silver-clad composition, and then by 1971, the coin became entirely copper-nickel clad, just like the quarter and the dime. This meant that the half dollar lost much of its intrinsic metal value, but it also meant the Mint could continue striking large numbers without worrying about rising silver costs. In 1994, both circulation strikes and special proof strikes were produced. The circulation coins came from the Philadelphia and Denver mints, while the San Francisco Mint created proof coins for collectors. These proof versions often came in polished, brilliant finishes, making them desirable additions to coin albums and sets. 1994 half-dollar design remained consistent with what Americans had come to expect. The obverse, featuring the left-facing portrait of President John F. Kennedy, designed by Gilroy Roberts, captures a strong, dignified profile with fine detailing of the hair and facial structure, while the reverse, designed by Frank Gasparo, features the presidential seal with an eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch surrounded by a ring of stars. This pairing of designs had by then become iconic, yet in the 1990s, the very consistency of the design also raised questions among numismatists and the public about whether the coin would ever change, or whether it had become essentially a permanent memorial piece that would never evolve like other denominations that saw redesigns over time. When we look at 1994 half dollars specifically, we must also consider mintage numbers in that year. The Denver Mint produced more than 23 million pieces, while the Philadelphia Mint struck over 23 million as well. Together, the mintage exceeded 46 million coins. Yet despite these large numbers, very few people saw them in circulation, because banks were not ordering them heavily and stores were not requesting them in change. Instead, many of these coins went straight into storage and eventually into the hands of collectors. This is why the 1994 half dollar, though technically a modern coin, carries with it the aura of a collector's piece rather than a circulating workhorse. It is also why high-grade examples, including mint state and proof strike versions, can command attention from enthusiasts who specialize in Kennedy Halvest. Economic context of the 1990s also plays a role in the story of this coin. The United States was experiencing a period of relative prosperity compared to the inflation and metal shortages of earlier decades. The dollar was strong, the mint was thriving with new programs on the horizon, including the state quarters program that would begin in 1999, and collector interest was high. People who grew up in the 1960s and remembered the tragedy of 1963 were by then adults with disposable income, and many of them enjoyed acquiring proof sets and uncirculated half-dollars as both nostalgic keepsakes and investments. Thus the 1994 half-dollar stands as a bridge between the past and the coming explosion of interest in circulating commemoratives that the state quarters would unleash. Coin also tells us about minting technology. By 1994, the United States Mint had refined its processes for striking sharp, consistent images using modern presses, dies, and planchets. Quality control was tighter than ever before, and collectors could expect proofs with mirror-like fields and frosted devices. Circulation strikes, though made in the tens of millions, still displayed relatively high levels of detail. This technological progress made the 1994 half-dollar a reliable and aesthetically pleasing piece, even if most Americans did not encounter it in their pocket change. If we then expand outward from the technical history into the cultural symbolism of the coin, we find even more layers. The Kennedy portrait remained one of the most recognized images on American money. By 1994, more than 3 decades had passed since his assassination, and yet his legacy as a symbol of hope, courage, and renewal still resonated. His youthful face on the half-dollar contrasted with the older images of past presidents like Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln, reminding Americans of a modern 20th century figure who shaped Cold War politics and inspired a generation. The continued presence of his image on the coin in 1994 reinforced the idea that money is not just currency, but also a vessel of collective memory. When collectors today study the 1994 half-dollar, they examine die varieties, strike qualities, and mint marks. Certain coins graded at the highest mint state levels can fetch premium values because of their rarity and pristine condition. The San Francisco proof coins, especially those graded deep cameo, can also reach significant prices far above their face value. Thus, even though millions exist, the finer details of preservation, rarity, and condition make the 1994 half-dollar an important study for anyone serious about coin collecting. And so the 1994 half-dollar is not simply a coin, it is a window into American history, economics, culture, and memory. It reflects the transition of the half-dollar from circulating workhorse to collector-focused issue. It embodies technological progress in minting. It preserves the image of a president whose life and death shaped modern America, and it demonstrates how something as simple as a 50-cent piece can carry stories that stretch across centuries. This narration style can be expanded deeply into mintage statistics, die analysis, grading, history, collector market prices, presidential symbolism, changes in commerce, the decline of the half-dollar in circulation, and Kennedy's cultural memory, all of which can easily fill 2 hours of professional documentary-style content.